insinuating that it's some paperwork making him bite his tongue. You know what I mean? It's like...
Camera's gone, okay. Did you see that coming?
I did not see that coming. I did not see that coming.
Alright, so Dillon Danis is in the news cycle this week for two different reasons, and both of them have given me a much needed reminder as to why I hate this guy so much. Obviously, in the clip that I just showed you, we see KSI slapping Dillon with a pancake during their promotional press conference. If you're wondering what the significance of the pancake is, I guess it was like International Pancake Day on Tuesday, which is when all this went down. What I do care about, however, is Dillon getting punked in front of the world. And trust me, I'm definitely not a KSI fan, but when these guys fight on March 29th, you can bet that I'll be hoping to see Danis get laid out. Now, when it comes to these circus boxing fights, I always root for the MMA guy, but call me crazy, I don't consider Danis to be an MMA guy, seeing as he has the same amount of pro fights as fucking CM Punk. But the difference between Dillon and CM Punk is that I know the names of the guys that CM Punk has fought. If you gave me a life or death bet to name Dillon Danis' two MMA opponents right now, then you might as well put the gun to my head, because I'm not going to be able to do it. Now check out some of these other press conference clips here.
Again, I'll reiterate, this is a boxing bout. Again, all the talk of choking and taking people down. Are you confident that you can keep that in on the night?
Yeah, it'll be easy. If he ducks his head though, you better be careful, that's it.
Can I just finally get your predictions for the night?
Choke him unconscious, and then stomp at his head as he's fucking dead.
Okay, I might be in the minority here when I say this, but I think it's lame whenever an MMA fighter goes into a boxing fight and then threatens to pull some MMA moves to try and intimidate their opponent. Like, if you signed up for a boxing fight, you gotta respect the rules of the contest that you agreed to, otherwise just stay in MMA. This is the equivalent to a Lethwei fighter coming into MMA and then threatening to throw headbutts. Of course, Dillon isn't the first person to do this. Darren Till threatened to kick Tommy Fury in the head during the lead up to their boxing fight, which scared Tommy enough for him to cancel the fight, which was a weenie move out of him for sure. Don't get me wrong.
And everyone that I've sparred from the Olympics who's turned over pro, it's different watching me on the television.
Well, at the end of the day, if I can't beat it, I'll just kick you in the face in there. How about that?
Well, that's not going to happen, Darren.
Well, it obviously is. How are you going to stop it?
Because we're eating the cage now in a boxing ring, and you're going to find out that boxing is very different to MMA.
I'll kick you straight in your face.
Listen,
you
kick me straight in the face, well, that's it. It's going to be a proper fight then, isn't it?
But then I'll win because I'm a proper fighter.
Well, you're not
a boxer.
I
don't walk into rooms. I don't walk in a room like this and see boxing and go shit. I walk in. No one in here is a threat to me. No, not one person in this room. Security, you, your dad are not a threat to me. I'm an MMA fighter, so
why come over there?
Or elbow you in the face, I will.
But I said this when Darren was making those threats, and I'm gonna say it now with Dillon. An MMA fighter going into a boxing fight and claiming that they're going to choke out or head kick their opponent just reeks of insecurity. Like, dog, we all know that you're the better fighter. There is a reason why these boxers don't come to MMA. James Toney versus Randy Couture is the only example needed to prove what would happen if any of these boxers decided to step into the octagon against any mid-level MMA fighter. But I think it's just poor form from Darren and Dillon to agree to do a boxing match, sign a contract to fight under boxing rules, and then during press conferences they threaten to pull illegal shit just to remind the world that they're a more well-rounded fighter. And especially when it comes to Dillon in particular, who's already shown that he can't punch his way out of a paper bag, hearing him bluster about choking out KSI and then stomping on his head just feels so fake and pathetic. Much like anybody else in the world, I admire authenticity, so when it comes to Dillon, who's constantly posturing himself to be something and someone that he's not, I just can't respect him. I mean, maybe I'd have a little bit more respect for Dillon as an athlete if he didn't give Bellator the runaround for like 7 years, where he said that he was going to fight again only to never fight again. And then the first time he was supposed to box KSI, he pulled out 10 days before the fight because of contractual issues, but anyone with a brain could see that he just never wanted to fight in the first place. He just wanted to use KSI's name to stay relevant before running away scared when it was time to actually show up. He made fun of KSI, acted like he was going to run through him, and then threw coffee on him during a face-off only to turn and literally run out of the building.
Nah, go, big bro. Get off the building. On the building. Relax.
And then what happened? He pulled out of the fight 2 weeks before it was supposed to go down. And then there's the Logan Paul fight, which before I go any further, in a reasonable world, nobody would have given a single shit about this fight because Dillon has done nothing to deserve a high-profile boxing match. But because Logan has a massive following, and because Dana spent months using Logan's wife as free promo, people actually started to pay attention. And then, in typical Danis fashion, he went out there and made a complete fool of himself. If you saw the fight, then you already know what happened. Dillon threw fewer punches in 6 rounds than some fighters throw in 1. He fought scared the entire entire time, landed 16 punches total, and in a desperate makeshift attempt to prove that he was the superior all-around fighter, he shoots a takedown, gets tossed to the ground, and eats a punch to the face while he's lying flat on his back. Like, is this dude for real? This guy who claims to be an MMA fighter gets ragdolled and ground and pounded by a fucking Disney Channel kid. This was seriously one of the most pathetic performances in combat sports history, and yet Danis still somehow tried to act like he won because he didn't get knocked out. Imagine setting the bar so low for yourself that simply surviving for 6 rounds in a boxing match against Logan Paul is considered a victory. And the worst part is the world sees him as an MMA fighter. We don't claim him, at least I don't. And although I'm doubtful on if Dillon's even going to show up to fight against KSI this time around, but if he does, I'm gonna be keeping my fingers crossed that we see him get properly flatlined. But honestly, all this boxing stuff I can live with, especially given the fact that Dillon is either going to embarrass himself against KSI or he's going to pull out again and show to the world how much of a fraud he is again. What really has me pissed off at Dillon is that this week it was announced that he will be fighting none other than Tony Ferguson in the GFL on May 11th. Look, I think that we can all agree that it's wrong for Tony to still be fighting, and I also think that we can all agree that the GFL are exploiting Tony's desire to continue fighting. And if we can agree on those things, can we also agree that Danis is an absolute loser for having his comeback to MMA be against a 41-year-old Tony Ferguson who's on an 8-fight losing streak?
I could be Tony tomorrow, you know, and I don't really need to train too much, but the weight they're making me make for him is the one I think is the toughest part, to be honest.
They're not making you make lightweight, are they?
165.
Jeez,
so
that's tough.
But even the owner was trying to get him to do 170, and he was like, I mean, you know, you fought him, so you know he's crazy.
Yeah.
So he was like, kind of like, oh, this is varsity JV thing. Like, he needs to make my weight, and like, he's like talking about like high school baseball and shit like that. So like, he's fucking off his rocker, dude. Like, he won't even give the 3 pounds and make 170 when his last fight was 170.
Like, is it not painfully obvious what Dillon's doing here? The guy is clearly cherry picking the easiest fight that he has available to him in order to try and prop himself up as a legitimate fighter. Because out of all the noteworthy welterweights and lightweights in the GFL, including Tyron Woodley, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, Jeremy Stevens, and the list goes on, Danis just happens to accept his first MMA fight in 6 years against Tony. And the worst part about it is, I don't know if Tony can beat him. Of course, the Tony of old would turn Dillon's face into hamburger helper, but Tony in his current form is a lot harder to put my faith in, even against a complete and utter putz like Danis. Now, the part that really sickens me about all of this is this. Let's entertain the possibility that we live in the nightmare timeline that Dillon ends up beating Tony. If this ends up happening, then you already know that he's going to gloat and brag that he came back from 6 years on the sidelines and beat a UFC legend and a former interim champion, all while completely ignoring the reality that Tony is a shell of his former self. Then he's going to leverage this completely meaningless win into more influencer boxing matches, and thus will be forced to put up with this guy's bullshit for who knows how much longer. And I understand that Tony also agreed to fight Dillon, but it's Tony. He's going to say yes to anybody. And admittedly, I am very hopeful that he still has enough in the tank to make it past Dillon, because at the end of the day, Dillon sucks, and I find it hard to believe that he's been actively training since his last fight in Bellator. But it's just so shameless how Dillon is trying to prop up his name against a guy who even he knows shouldn't be fighting anymore. Like, I'd really love to know if the GFL offered the Tony fight to anybody else, and if there was anyone who turned it down, because I'd like to think that there's some self-respecting fighters, even in the GFL, who have the sense to say no when it comes to fighting Tony in 2025. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but what we do know is that Danis said yes to fighting a guy that's significantly smaller than him, older than him, and on an 8-fight losing streak. And if you somehow still have any respect for Dillon after all of this, then I don't know what to tell you. This guy is just such a little weasel that's grifted his 15 minutes of fame from hanging out with Conor McGregor into a full-blown career, and the guy can't fucking fight. There are so many very talented boxers and MMA fighters who are struggling to make ends meet and who deserve so much more notoriety. Meanwhile, we have Dillon who's getting boxing fights even though he can't box, and he's getting MMA fights even though he hasn't stepped into the cage since 2019. He's somehow managed to turn those 2 unimpressive Bellator wins into a half-decade-long con where he pretends to be a relevant fighter despite the fact that he has no actual accomplishments in the sport. The only reason that anybody knows about this guy is that he would say that he was Conor's best friend. And even though he does have a respectable background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, his lack of striking ability, cardio, and overall MMA game make it clear that he was never going to be a legitimate fighter, nor did he have any plans to be one. And hey, if you like the guy because he's a troll and because he says crazy things to people that you don't like, then that's fine and I can see that. But him posing as an MMA fighter when he's the loosest definition of one is what really bothers me. Like, the guy is so much more of an influencer than he is a combat sports athlete, which is the exact reason why he keeps being given influence influencer boxing fights. And even though I'm sure he can make a good amount of money from just pursuing being a full-time influencer, the guy clearly became addicted to the attention that he got from riding Conor's coattails, and he abandoned all sense of dignity in order to keep chasing the dragon that is fame. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be rich, and I guess there's nothing wrong with wanting to be famous, but I just hate Dillon for his lack of authenticity. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about Dillon Danis. Do you think he's going to step into the ring against KSI, and do you think that Tony can beat him in the GFL? As always, if you liked the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.